Welcome to the Play Their Way podcast, where we talk about all things in child first coaching. I'm your host, Laura Jane Jones, and today I'm excited to welcome our special guest, Zoya Zia. Hi Zoya, so lovely to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Zoya, originally from Texas and Pakistan, is the Senior Impact and Evaluation Officer at Chance to Shine. She received her Masters in Human Rights and Politics from the London School of Economics, and her passion and interest lies in the relationship between sport and children's rights. So children's rights feels like a very lofty concept at times, and certainly when it comes to sport, it feels like a much bigger thing than the space that we're operating in. So from your perspective, Zoya, where does this all fit together?
I think well-being is the main outcome that children's rights and sport share. So it's all about what we can do to empower young people, to make them feel that they have a voice in this world, and that's one of the key rights of a child. So when I think about children's rights in sport, I just think about how can we maximize a child's enjoyment of life, and sport is a huge part of that because they get to make friends, they get to let out steam, they get to express themselves. So that's kind of where I see them playing together, is really just around children's well-being.
So is sport about respecting the mandated children's rights or educating children in what their rights are?
I think it's both. I think by opening up a space for young people to say what they want to do, to be a team player, to become a leader on the pitch, you're actually teaching them, and they're teaching us, that they have the right to speak their mind, that they have the right to lead, that they don't just have to listen to instructions all the time. And it's really empowering getting to see sport do that for a young person, especially where school traditionally might not allow that for young people. Sport is a space where they can have that empowerment.
Children's rights feels like a really abstract concept or term at times. It's not a particularly tangible thing for us. But at Play Their Way, we've divided it quite basically into voice, choice and journey. So maybe you're the best positioned person to flesh that out for us.
I don't know if I'm the best, but I think being able to work in a grassroots level with cricket has given me space to think about this question. So in terms of voice, for example, I work in data, so I get to do surveys with young people, I get to speak to young people, and I think that is really important, getting feedback from young people about the program, not just assuming that because they're smiling or because it's a sport, they'll like it. You really need to understand the nuances of what makes a young person enjoy a sports session, what puts them off it. And then in terms of choice, they do have the right to be able to say, actually this session I'd rather do this or this activity. And I think with our work at Chance to Shine, our street projects, which operate across the country in community centers offering free cricket, that's a space where young people can bring their own energy and passion for the game. And it's really led by young people. So that's where choice comes into play. And then journey is all about, I guess, again, well-being. So when a young person first comes to a street project, for example, they might be shy, they might not be confident. We have a lot of times like immigrants who come to our sessions who their very first time in the UK, they're already bringing their young person to a cricket session because they know that cricket is a common language, sport goes beyond borders, and then they kind of develop over time. They build confidence, they build friendships. So I think each of those elements has really tangible descriptors of what that looks like in practice, and I'm lucky that my job gets to bring me close to that and to see it in action.
Tell me a bit more about Chance to Shine and what the organisation's about.
Yes, so Chance to Shine is a national cricket charity. It's been around since 2005, and it works with just about 600,000 young people a year. So we engage young people through schools. We bring free coaches in to thousands of schools, state schools across the country, and then we run 300 street projects. So like I said, all across the country. We have one as far north as Aberdeen, and we have some as far south as like Bournemouth. Like it's really covering the geographic range of the country. And it's just a free space for young people every week to come and play cricket. I think I put the emphasis on free right now because of the situation the country's in, because sport increasingly feels like there's barriers around it, whether it's economics or race or gender. So it's all about freeing that up and letting young people come and do what they want in that space, and feel safe and to feel like they can make friendships. So we're really about using cricket as a conduit for well-being. That's really at the heart of our work, is empowering young people to play, learn, and develop through the sport.
One thing you've mentioned there through Chance to Shine is the inclusion of children from different backgrounds, be that racial groups or girls and boys in different sporting environments. How important is it for children who come from minority backgrounds or are in a minority in a sporting environment to really feel like they do have a voice?
I think a lot is set in stone when you're a young person about a sport. And if you have a really negative experience with sport, if you go to a session and there's no one that looks like you or no one is catering for you, it can put you off physical activity. I know that from my own experience growing up in Texas. I never saw myself in sports. I loved sport, and I still to this day love sport. I'm always staying up late watching the San Antonio Spurs, which are my NBA team. I'm obsessed with sport, but because I had negative experiences growing up, I never got to play. So I have this alternate life where I can see myself as an athlete that I'm not. And when I think about that and I see the young people playing cricket today, I think we have such an opportunity to challenge that and to make sure that from the beginning, young people feel that they have a space within sport, that they belong. Because like I said, if they don't get that early on, then years down the line, they're not going to feel like they can play cricket or that they can play football or whatever sport it is. And physical activity is such a huge part of anyone's well-being that we really can't afford to put people off it in the beginning.
Do you think, from your own experiences, had you been afforded more of a voice in those sporting environments, your journey through sport would have been different? More opportunities would have been available to you, perhaps?
I don't know if I had the talent to go on like long term as I might imagine or fantasize, but at least to play it for a few more years, because I really didn't give it as much of a shot as I would have if I had seen people who look like me, or even just like been approached by a coach, you know, in a different way. So I think it's a lot to do with how coaches are taught inclusion, and children's rights is a really good framework to teach coaches that you know, all young people deserve a space, and they might not all have the same background or experience, but catering to it and really respecting people's differences is a huge part of children's rights, I think.
And we're talking about the use of children's rights and the observation of children's rights in a sporting environment. But how much will children knowing their rights from sport help them in other areas of life, do you think?
That's something we see all the time at Chance to Shine, that like a young person will come to a street session totally insecure, shy, never speaking, and then over the course of playing a sport that is a little bit challenging, and cricket is not the easiest of sports, it teaches them resilience, and they apply that to other aspects of their life. So we've heard stories of young women coming through the program and becoming, you know, class leaders in their schools, or like really taking ownership of that in school. We've seen young people come and express a desire to become a coach because they've seen what coaching has done for them. So I think it definitely opens up avenues across your life when you are able to tap into sport and to see that you have a voice and that it matters and it should be heard, because young people aren't taught off the get-go that they have a voice and that they should use it. They need to really have that space made out for them, and I think sport does that, or it should do that.
From a Chance to Shine perspective, and through this podcast series so far, we've certainly looked at things from a kind of grassroots UK-based approach. But on a global scale, where does children's rights fit in with sport?
It's something that's growing a lot altogether. We see children's rights in sport growing in terms of, I guess, the international humanitarian sector. So sport being used in conflict settings, sport being used to empower young women when they're facing gender-based violence, for example. So we know that there's a lot of nuances in how it's used around the world, but sport generally is seen as something like art, like music, like so many other aspects of life can empower and support young people. So that's how I see it playing across the global scale. But I also think as young people navigate an increasingly conflict-ridden world, it's not easy to be a young person right now. It's definitely not easy to be an adult, and it's even harder, I'd say, to be a young person right now. Children's rights in sport is all about opening up a safe space, because so much of the world can feel dangerous, so much of the world can feel uncertain, and I say that even within a UK context, with the cost of living, with just fear of other people, fear of diversity, a lot of racism. Like, it's a hard time to be a young person, and sport and children's rights just offers a platform for young people to feel like they can be themselves, that they don't have to fight, that they can let loose, and sport is really good at doing that. So I think it's a space that's going to continue to grow, and I'm glad to see more people and more initiatives like this come through where they're bringing the two together.
You've alluded to where children's rights fits in with war-torn countries and conflict and stuff like that, and I think that's probably when we talk about rights and human rights and children's rights, we are thinking about it in that kind of global sense, and in those places where children are perhaps not clothed, not watered, don't have a roof over their heads. Does that mean, though, that we perhaps ignore it a little bit in the sense of UK sport and where it can and should be fitting in here?
Yeah, I think children's rights is every child everywhere. So obviously there's going to be differences in what a young person can access, but there are young people struggling in the UK. Even if a young person has their basic needs met, actually I would say their basic needs aren't met if they don't have a space to speak their mind and to be empowered the way that sport does. So I think we definitely shouldn't neglect a young person in Brixton, for example, who really wants to play football but feels like there's no woman playing football or no girls playing football around them, and they really want to make it on the national team, but the national team isn't diverse. Like, all of these things really play through to the smallest level with the grassroots. So I think it's about every young person being empowered, and we're failing young people in the UK if we're only thinking children's rights matters in the most extreme conflict situation. It matters even here.
One of the things when we're talking about voice and we're talking about giving children a platform to tell us what they're enjoying or tell us what they're not enjoying or what they want to do, it does incite a kind of thought process of kids shouting out in classrooms and stuff. But it isn't about that, is it? It's about finding a way to let children communicate with us through sport. How important is that we find those mechanisms for kids to be able to tell us what they want to do?
It's everything, because if we're not centering young people in our work, then we're just making assumptions, and the last thing in my role I can afford to do is make assumptions that a young person is enjoying a program. So it's really about being accurate about what the picture is, and the more that we open up space for young people to feedback, the easier that process is going to be. So I'm not going to say that the first time you ask a young person what they want out of a session that they're going to know what to say. Like, it takes time to build that, even for the young person, because like I said, they're not taught how to do that in school. They're not taught how to do that maybe even at home sometimes. It's just about listening and learning also comes through speaking and leading. And I think that when we look at it in a sport context, we have to build that in, and it takes time, but it's definitely worth it in the long run, because we aren't serving young people right if we're not including that.
It almost sounds counterintuitive, but are we having to teach them to have their voice? Obviously, we want them to speak their mind, but do we have to give them the space, and do we have to tell them that it's okay to do that?
I think in a way it's weird, because I see them teaching us when they do it. So in the beginning, it might be unworking a lot of internalized sense of like, I have to be quiet, otherwise I'll get in trouble. Like, I can't speak because this will happen. So there might be some reteaching around there, but I think once the young people are speaking, they teach us all the time. They have so much to offer us in terms of how do we navigate the world together, on an equal footing. Obviously there's differences between children and adults, but the more we look at children as, people that we oversee and that we're the ones in charge, I think that's just creating a hierarchy that shouldn't exist. So trying to untangle it a bit, obviously while looking after safeguarding needs and everything else, but we need to kind of flip it on its head and think about how we can learn from young people.
Are there examples that you've had that you can share with us through Chance to Shine of occasions where perhaps you've been surprised when children have been given a voice by what they've come back and told you?
Yeah, I ask this question to teachers a lot, and they'll say when we bring a coach into a session, there's young people who normally in a PE session just stand outside. They don't engage. They don't ever like sports. So when we bring in a coach to teach cricket, that isn't necessarily their thing. But over the course of the sessions, the way that our coaching is done and the way that we empower coaches and teachers through CPD, it's all about inclusion. It's all about personal best. It's not about competition or winning necessarily. And by the end of it, teachers tell me they're surprised that a young person who's never ever shown interest in any sport before is the one wanting to be a leader. And so we've heard stories of young people who don't even like sport in the beginning actually deciding to be like sports leaders at the school, for example, or expressing an interest in playing professionally or being a coach. So we hear it all the time that young people surprise their teachers. They probably even surprise themselves, because that first time a coach shows up isn't when the change happens. It happens over the course of multiple sessions and even after the sessions have ended. So something I'm interested in is getting to talk to teachers after we've left the school and see what's happening still. Like, has the change lasted? What is the landscape looking like now? So I see it happening a lot, and I'm really glad that I get to hear that from teachers, and to see it myself when I go to street projects and witness a lot of change happening.
It's really interesting when you talk about listening to teachers, because I think something we focused on quite a lot through this podcast series is children giving us their feedback. But I guess as part of coaching children and teaching them, we become a conduit through them, and we become their voice. Is that part of children's rights, do you think, us listening to kids more?
Yeah, I think it has to happen. Otherwise, we're making assumptions or we're not understanding the full picture. And when children are speaking to us, we're really opening up a space that empowers them in the long run. So if a young person is taught from a really young age that they can speak, that it matters, that what they say makes a difference, we're not just, because it can't just be listening for the sake of listening either. If we're only listening to make it look like we care, they're going to know. So it has to be listening with the intent to act upon whatever the young person says and to action it. And when a young person sees that, it empowers them. It will give them the confidence to overcome adversity in life. Like I'm able to see it pan out across the world because every young person will come across barriers of their own, whether it's related to their background or anything else. And we need to build that resilience by showing them they have a voice, by having them show us they have a voice. And so I think it's all very connected in terms of the future and overcoming adversity and just being really resilient.
I guess what you said there fits into voice becoming choice.
Mm-hmm.
So where does choice fit in with the framework of what children's rights mean?
Yeah, choice really comes down to the freedom of expression and the freedom of thought, which are both enshrined within the UNCRC. So I think it's about having young people be honest and open with us about what they're feeling. So when, for example, at a street project, they do a lot of drills or a lot of warm-ups. I've heard it, like young people will say, like, actually, can we just get on with the game or can we do this or that? And it's great to see that they feel that it matters. They're not just being angry, because the last thing we want is for them to treat a sporting session like a duty, like something they have to do, they have no say in. All the young people that are coming, we want them to come because they want to come. And you can only build that trust if there's a feedback loop. So I think that's where choice comes into play, is building a feedback loop between coaches and parents and even me as someone who works within data and insight for a charity to understand how we can best serve them. Because if that's what the point of the charity is, if that's what the point of sports as UK coaching might be, then we really need to center young people within the research and within the feedback.
How do we manage that, though, if we're talking about giving children a place for choice and giving them the ability to decide what they want to do? So anecdotally, you said in these street projects, kids are saying, can we just get on with playing the game? We still have to retain a structure there. Mm-hmm. So how can we manage that so that they still feel like they're empowered?
It's taking that. So I've seen it happen with coaches be like, okay, I know we want to get on with the game, and it's really important that we warm up. It's just so we're prepared to play. This is why warming up is important. Pointing out, different health benefits. And so within our street sessions, we have a module called life skills. So every session, a coach will bring in a specific life skill, and it can be something like leadership. It can be something like health and wellness. And they actually incorporate that within the lesson. So then young people are not only getting this rich insight into their own well-being and to what supports them, but also they are talked to in a way that's really respectful. So if a young person says, I just want to play, the coach will say, yeah, play is really important. We're going to get to play. Here's why we're warming up now. And is that all right with you? Like the way that I've seen coaches talk to children, it's really, really inspiring because it's a completely different, I guess, way to interact with young people. It's one that really respects their autonomy. And I guess at the beginning I said children's rights is all about well-being. It's also about autonomy and respecting how every young person has a different background and a different say on something. And so really just the same way we would with an adult, understand that we have different opinions, we have different wants, different needs. It's doing the same thing within a sporting context for young people.
Do you think we need to recalibrate what authority means to children, in the sense that we might shout at kids and we might operate in a different way to how we would if we were in a hierarchy in a work setting as adults? Is that something that we need to look at in terms of making sure that kids know what their rights are and knowing that they have a voice in that space?
Yeah, I think the more that they fear authority, the more that it's drilled into their head that you do this or you get in trouble, the less likely they are to be expressive, the less likely they are to be creative, the less likely they are to challenge, the box that they're within. And I think the only way we can see really big change in the world, the change that we need, and this is like way beyond the scope of sport, is if young people are creative and if they're allowed to think outside the box. And that can only happen if we're really pushing them to speak and push back on us. And so, yeah, there needs to be a challenging of authority and a challenging of traditional ways of teaching and even coaching, perhaps. I think it all needs to be turned on its head and reevaluated.
You say it's beyond the scope of sport, but actually that might, in fact, give us better athletes in the long run and perhaps increase and continue participation.
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that children know what their rights are and how to advocate for themselves?
I think a lot of it has to do with practice. So the way that you start a session, the way that you kind of provide feedback throughout the session, it's all part of it. But I think also some of it has to be literally going through the UN Charter of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, because this isn't something that is included in all schools. It's something that young people might not know of. I didn't know children's rights until I was a teenager, and that's because I really wanted to pursue it as a career. So I think starting from an early age, it's being really open and honest about what the UN affords you as a person, as a child, regardless of your background, and then bringing examples of what it looks like in practice. For example, with freedom of expression, a coach can say, like, this is a part of the UN Convention. It's something that all countries except for the US have fully signed on to. And it's something that means that you have the right to be heard. And if you have a feeling on something, then you can share that with me. You can share that with another adult. You can even share it amongst yourselves. So I think it is a little bit of both, practicing it in action by changing the way that we might coach traditionally, but also actually speaking that language. And that's something that I would really like to get to lead on at Chance to Shine, is building in like specific vocabularies around children's rights, because it is there, and I'm seeing it happen in other sporting contexts and in schools. Even there are some schools that teach children's rights to young people as part of the curriculum, and I think that's really fantastic, and it should be done everywhere.
What are those vocabularies? What are the kind of building blocks that we can give to coaches in this sense to arm children with the ability to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, so telling them that the freedom of expression and the voice choice journey, like even speaking that language to a young person, I think will really open up what sport can give them. Because if they just come to the session and think, I just like it because I like to have fun, that is great, and that's a great outcome. But if they come to it and they think this is just another thing my mom wants me to do, or I don't know if what I can get out of this, the more young people know what sport can give them, the more likely they are to tap into it. So being able to tell them from the get-go, like, this can be something that really builds your confidence, that really teaches you resilience. And you might not be the biggest cricket fan. You might never want to play cricket when you're an adult. You might just want this now. Even then, there's so much benefit out of it. So I think it really empowers them within that session to think beyond the scope of what they might normally think that sport provides them.
I know that through your work, you've got an interest in minority participation and discrimination. So how much is there an importance that through giving children a voice, they're going to be able to battle against things like racism and misogyny and sexism in these environments as well?
I think there's a lot of just acceptance of, yeah, the world is set up this way and we just have to deal with it. Or, yeah, the team isn't diverse and I just have to deal with it. And there's a lot of dealing with it that's happening in society, and especially down to the level of a young person. So I think if they're able to have that voice, it means that they're more likely to push back on that. And that's not to say that all the responsibility is on a person of color, for example, to push through it. No, like, society needs to change. That needs to happen beyond just a one person doing it. But I think the more you have young people being empowered, they form collectives, they can form partnerships, they can have allies. Like, I think there's a lot that comes when a young person has that resilience in themselves, that I can handle this and I'm not going to stand for this. So instead of quietly taking it, I'm going to say that this isn't the right way of doing sport, or that I'm not feeling included, or that my friends aren't feeling included. And that's something, even within a cricket session, we have a survey that we do, and a lot of young people will say in the open response, like, they love the session and this is why. But some of the feedback that we work on is when students say, like, actually, I don't think all of us were included, or actually, I think that the coach catered more towards, people who were already sporty. And that's like a very, very, very small minority of our respondents. But I think that's still something we need to work with, is when young people are noticing inclusion or exclusion. And if we teach them actually discrimination isn't right and actually inequalities have to be overcome, they're more likely to advocate for each other as well, whether or not they come from that background.
The survey you've mentioned is a little bit like the one that we have on the Play Their Way website that is available as a free resource to coaches. But one thing we've talked about with that previously is giving it to groups. How important is it for us to repeat that process, so that we've already talked before about kids earning their voice and learning that they've got a voice. So how important is it that we're not just doing it once over the course of a term or a 6-week session, we're doing it repeatedly as they find their voice in these scenarios?
I think they need it's not going to feel real, and it's not going to have an impact if it's just that one time. So whether or not I'm doing a survey, the teacher, the coach checking in with the young people who are actually there, it needs to happen. There has to be feedback within the session. There's the feedback that I collect, the capital F feedback, you can say, but then there's the lowercase feedback that happens all the time, like during a session, after a session, when they reflect about what they learned, which happens a lot in our sessions, is like thinking about what did we get out of this. So I think that's a really crucial part of it, is making sure that young people don't just see it as a box ticking thing, and that they know that this is something that is challenging maybe the way that they're used to things within school.
Do we almost have to look at it through the eyes of a child, in terms of, if they are providing us with feedback, we have to act on that so that they know they've got a voice in that situation?
Yeah. Otherwise, it's not going to be meaningful for them or for us. Like, we will just go about business as usual. So I think that doesn't go in our benefit or in their benefit. So we really have to be honest about what we're going to do with the data that they give us or with the feedback that they give us, and be intentional about acting on it.
For coaches and teachers who are listening, who might want to now read up on the UN rights of the child and get involved in it more, it does feel like a really big subject. So what would be your advice for them to get into this from a kind of entry perspective?
Yeah, so I went to a Play Their Way workshop in September, and the first thing that we did was go through the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. There's obviously the full text document, but then there's a document that just lists out the rights and what they are. And then we were asked which right speaks to you the most. I think teachers and coaches can stand a lot from just looking at that it's like 1-page document, looking at what the rights are and thinking to themselves, like, which one speaks to me the most and why, and then seeing actually how is this related to other ones. So I think for me it was non-discrimination, because I think that plays through in every other element, and every element plays amongst the other, I guess, within the UN Convention. But I think start from a place that's personal. Start from a place that maybe speaks to you or your experiences growing up, or if you have kids, like what you see or what you want for them. I think really connect with it on a personal level, and that will enable it to feel a lot less dense, because it shouldn't be dense. I think the more accessible it is, the better. So definitely look at it from a personal angle and see what you get out of it first.
On the flip side, do you think it's important for coaches and teachers to take themselves out of their comfort zone with regard to that?
Yeah. So that's just a starting point. Then obviously if you think, okay, this matters to me because of this reason, but there are all these other rights that might mean more to someone else because they have had a difficult upbringing, or because they come from this background or that background. So I think you start from a personal level, but it definitely can't end there. It has to go beyond, and to think about what matters to other young people or to other people across the world.
My kind of finishing question to a lot of people on the podcast has been, what's your advice? I think you provided us with a lot of that so far already. But one thing you talked about is what you've learned through Chance to Shine. So I guess my final question to you is going to be, what is the most surprising thing that you've learned through your journey with Chance to Shine? Something that you take into other sessions now and other environments with regard to coaching?
I think just the fact that we have a lot to learn from young people. I think I always loved kids. I always wanted to do something for kids and empowering them, but actually the idea that I have to do something for kids has been kind of upverted in my head. It's about what they can do for us and what they can teach us and how they can empower us, and it goes both ways. And I think that's the thing that I've learned the most, is just every day that I get to go to a session and I get to see change happen. It takes me back to when I was a kid. It makes me think about the future. So I think children, there's a lot of responsibility that we have as adults for caring for them, but then there's also a lot that we learn from them. And I think that, yeah, they are a source of hope, and they're a source of joy and inspiration, and I really want them to be centered in any work that comes through sport and children's rights. So yeah.
Thank you, Zoya, so much for your time. It's been incredibly illuminating and really educational for me. And I hope those of you listening at home have agreed. I hope you've enjoyed it, and be sure to leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might like it too. Check out our website, www.playtheirway.org, and follow Play Their Way on social media at Play Their Way on TikTok, X and LinkedIn, and at Play Their Way UK on Facebook and Instagram.